Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tani Colbert-Sangri, and I'm with the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. We're absolutely delighted to be able to host the informational session on the online graduate certificate in Greenhouse Gas Management at George Washington University. My role today is to be your guide through the session. I'll introduce our first speaker and facilitate the question and answer section at the end of the webinar. Before we dive in, a few logistical notes. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available, made available in an email to participants and posted to the program website. The webinar will last 30 minutes with time at the end for questions. And at any time, you may ask a question of the presenters by typing a question into either the question or chat box, both of which I'll be monitoring. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact me, the organizer, privately via the chat box. All right, so without further ado, I would like to bring forth and introduce Rachel Jonasson, who is a professor at the George Washington University School of Engineering and in charge of the certificate program. Take it away, Rachel.
Thanks, Tani. Hi, I'm Professor Rachel Jonasson, the Director of Greenhouse Gas Management at the George Washington University, and I'm so glad to be able to meet you today. This is one of my favorite events, and I hope it gives you a good picture of what you will experience when you enroll in the Greenhouse Gas Management Certificate Program. Today, I'll give you information about the administration of the certificate program in Greenhouse Gas Management and how your online learning will work. And then two others related to our program will give more details. Tom Baumann is co-founder of the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute and someone I've worked with closely over the past 5 years as we developed this collaborative offering in greenhouse gas management, the first of its kind in a university graduate engineering program. Tom co-authored several courses incorporated into the certificate program, including the project level accounting, verification, and information systems. Tom will tell you more about the courses you will take in the program and how they prepare you for the rapidly growing field of greenhouse gas management. Professor Mark Trexler is our other speaker today. Professor Trexler is one of 5 faculty within the program who will support your learning, and he offers a deep background in greenhouse gas management and associated issues in climate change. Professor Trexler will give you more detail about the course he teaches in this program. It's called Greenhouse Gas Mitigation and is the 3rd of our 4 courses and is one of the courses available to you this spring as you begin your training. Next slide, please. Let me begin by telling you about our institution. The George Washington University hosts about 25,000 students in 10 colleges and schools, including the School of Engineering and Applied Science, where your program is located. Within the school, there are 5 departments, and yours, Engineering Management and Systems Engineering, is one of the largest and oldest in the United States. Nearly all of our students are graduate students, and over half are off-campus students like you will be in this program. So we are deeply steeped in graduate and professional education. To create this certificate, we worked closely with the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute for several years. It has been fully approved by the GWU Faculty Senate and the GWU Board of Trustees. The 4 graduate level courses are 3 credit hours each. All courses can be applied to graduate programs at GW, including online programs that lead to a master's degree. All these courses are produced in conjunction with the university experts in cinematography, animation, and the art and science of learning. Each course has an online librarian working directly with you and the instructor to ensure that you have access to all the online knowledge resources of the university. The faculty have been selected and appointed specially to this program in cooperation with GHGMI the exact expertise and teaching ability required. Besides myself, those teaching this year include Professors Marco Buttazzone, Frédéric Gagnon-Lebrun, and Mark Trexler. You can learn more about the faculty at our website. One course will be available this spring, the one that Mark Trexler teaches, which he will tell you about shortly. We are now accepting applications for the spring cohort, and courses will begin in mid-January. The expected minimum level of effort for each course is 7.5 hours per week. This minimum expectation is set by university regulations. The fees for this online offering are reduced from those for campus courses by about 1/2 and are $995 per credit hour, including a rebate from our institute. For admission into the program, these requirements hold. You must have a suitable bachelor's degree such as engineering, mathematics, or science, or a bachelor's degree with appropriate work experience, which you must document. You must have a B or better average in your junior and senior years and must submit a transcript. You also must submit a statement of purpose indicating your career objectives and how you see the certificate fitting into those plans. Applications for this spring must be submitted by the middle of December. Next slide, please. Now for the fun stuff. You'll use Blackboard as the learning management system for each course. You will participate in live synchronous sessions weekly using full two-way audio and video. This will also allow private conferences with your professor or with fellow students. Blackboard is a really rich learning environment with many resources for each course. You're seeing a round-the-clock look at a few of them here. The exact resources will vary from one course to another. Let's look at a few going clockwise from the top left. You'll use and construct wikis to share knowledge with your colleagues. Short videos help to explain the tougher concepts like radiative forcing. The top center shows a few students discussing the problem of bunker fuels. You'll get access to many interviews with experts in each area. In the upper right, I'm interviewing a world expert on solar energy. On the right, you see the Blackboard hosts discussion boards where you share your ideas and thoughts on a particular topic with other students. The spider diagram in the lower right shows a special tool Professor Trexler uses in his course. Because GW sits in the midst of the nation's government and international policymakers, you have special access to unique expertise. At the bottom center, you see experts in the Government Accountability Office discussing federal greenhouse gas emissions in an on-site video they helped us produce specially for this program. You'll encounter many similar special videos. On the left side, you see the actual Blackboard system with its blue navigation pane and an example exercise. Finally, in the center, you see one of the ways we help you keep your learning on track as the course progresses. Each learning video contains stopping points shown by the green boxes at the bottom. They may point to additional resources or may quiz you as illustrated here. You'll get instant feedback within the video and follow-up from your instructor. Well, I hope that gives you a flavor for what your learning will be like. Now I'd like to turn it over to Tom Bauman, who will tell you more about the content of the courses and how they prepare you for the global demand for experts in this field. Tom?
Thank you very much, Rachel, and hello, everyone. I want to start by saying that all of us here at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute are proud to have co-developed this carbon management certificate program with George Washington University. The courses that I'll introduce shortly are built upon our expertise over the last 20 years or so, working on climate change policy, carbon markets, and greenhouse gas emissions accounting. Our experience includes active engagement in authoring many of the international guidelines and standards for greenhouse gas inventories, for example, under the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. as well as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the ISO standards. We're also very proud to announce our recently launched collaboration with the UNFCCC Secretariat, in which we are training over 700 experts around the world under the UNFCCC's National Inventory Process. GHGMI has members in over 160 countries already. And in the near future, we hope to be announcing a similar initiative, particularly for the Paris Agreement. GHGMI is also collaborating within the United States with the Climate Registry and Climate Action Reserve to support the California Air Resources Board to train and accredit verifiers for the low carbon fuel standard. And in addition, internationally, GHGMI is developing a regional MRV hub in the Caribbean to support capacity building in that region. All of this work showing us that there's enormous need for this expertise for supporting implementation of climate change policies via carbon management, and that it's currently in short supply in both government and the private sector. In this certificate program, our goal is to instill in you an understanding that the role of a carbon management professional requires not only the technical competency, but also the ethical and career commitment, because this is something bigger than oneself, of course. It's not completely hyperbole to say that the fate of the world will rest in large part with tomorrow's carbon managers. So this slide that you're looking at illustrates the extent, which continues to evolve, of carbon pricing policies around the world, which covers a significant fraction of global emissions, whether that's using emissions trading programs or carbon tax schemes. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you'll see the certificate program we're offering is both uniquely focused and yet comprehensive. Over the 1 or 2 years of the program, you'll develop the skills needed to be a practicing carbon management professional. First, you'll get the essential background on climate science and climate policy in both domestic and international contexts. And we can't stress too much how important it is that you have a deep understanding of these enabling policies, because they drive the greenhouse gas mitigation and management activities. We'll of course dive deep into the rules and methodologies for greenhouse gas accounting. This will focus on the energy sector because it's such a dominant source of emissions. And when it comes to analyzing how to reduce emissions, which we call project level accounting, we'll also focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. And an especially unique aspect of the curriculum is the course on how to use information technology for greenhouse gas data management, as well as the critical process for how to be a verifier of emissions data and reports. Next slide, please. For those of you that choose the option of completing a final course project, there is the possibility of writing up your work and having it published as an article in the peer-reviewed Carbon Management Journal, which is sponsored by the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here you'll see the listed 4 courses specifically for the certificate program. In addition to receiving your carbon management certificate, your course credit is also fully transferable into a master's degree or a PhD program. Now I'd like to introduce Mark Trexler, who will instruct the course on GHG mitigation and management, and he'll be able to give you an overview of that course. Mark.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Mark Trexler. I was hired into the World Resources Institute in 1988 to work on the first carbon offset project that ultimately led into the whole topic of carbon markets and everything else, climate change mitigation. A few years later, I started the first consultancy focused on business climate change mitigation in terms of business risk, and business risk management around climate change, and built that consultancy and basically did management consulting around the world with companies on climate change issues for a couple of decades. So I'm happy to come back to George Washington in terms of this particular course on the topic of business climate change mitigation. And let me just put the topic into a bit of perspective. Right now we're at a very interesting time in the climate change conversation. We're at a time where on the one hand, business is being blamed for climate change, and on the other hand, people are saying, well, since policymakers aren't going to tackle it, it's up to business to solve climate change. So the range of expectations around the topic of business and climate change mitigation is enormous. And yet there's a lot of misunderstanding of what it means to talk about business and climate change mitigation. Is business simply an extension of societal policymaking, or is business focused purely on 3-month profit cycles and could care less about climate change if it's more than 3 years away? There's a lot of literature, there's a lot of analysis, there's a lot of issues that underlie those questions. And for anyone that wants to work in the greenhouse gas management space within a company, it's important to sort of understand that lay of the land. It's not just about understanding marginal abatement cost curves, although we cover that in the course. It's about understanding the role of business in the conversation. And if you're not working within a company, if you're working in the policy sector, if you're working in the NGO sector, it's very useful to understand where business is coming at this issue from, and to understand what exactly is going on in the thinking of a CEO or a chief financial officer or a chief risk officer when they approach the topic of climate change. So that's sort of setting the context for this very interesting time in this conversation as to whether we're, as a society, we're going to tackle climate change. And if so, is business the villain? Is business the savior? What is the role of business? Next slide. So what we cover in this course is quite a bit for a course. So we cover the topics of how societal and business perceptions of climate risks differ. Why are they different? We talk about things like carbon price forecasts. Tom showed you a slide of the extent of carbon pricing around the world. It's a fascinating slide. Each year we get a new slide showing that there's more and more and more carbon pricing going on around the world. What that slide doesn't show is that the level of carbon pricing going on around the world is totally insufficient to actually accomplish very much in terms of greenhouse gas mitigation. So a key question is, where are carbon prices headed? And from a business perspective, where could they be headed in terms of what should business be thinking about in terms of the possible carbon price trajectories if and when, for example, society ever decides to tackle climate change? So we get into those kinds of issues. We get into marginal abatement cost curves, what companies can do internally, what they can do externally, what the risks are of relying on internal versus external emissions reductions, carbon offsets. All of these kinds of issues come into play in the course. And we also get into the whole topic, which you may be hearing more about because it's really exploded in the last couple of years, the whole topic of scenario planning and business scenario planning around climate change. A lot of people are going to be hired into a lot of companies to work in one way or another on the topic of climate scenario planning for large companies, because they're getting asked by investors, they're getting asked by banks, they're getting asked by lots of people, what does your climate risk profile look like, and are you doing scenario planning? And so we cover, that's another one of the topics that we cover in the course. So it's a pretty comprehensive course on this whole issue of business and climate change mitigation. Next slide. The way we do the course is split up. I mean, it follows the same format that you'll see in all of the different courses in this certificate program. We have recorded videos that cover a lot of the topical information each week. We have interactive class discussions, at least 1 hour a week, to talk about materials, to talk about assignments. Something that's unique to this particular course is the use of knowledge management tools. I personally think that knowledge management is an absolutely key skill that people should have in today's job market, and it's the one skill that we generally don't teach at all. And so in this course, you'll get exposed to some knowledge management tools, including what you see on your screen there at the bottom center. That's a screenshot of the climate web. The climate web is a massive knowledge management system for pretty much everything to do with climate change, and we use it extensively in the course because most of what you'll need in the course is actually in the climate web. So instead of wasting a lot of time searching for stuff on Google and being dependent on the first 2 or 3 things that pop up on your screen in response to a Google search, the climate web points you to what we've spent thousands of hours aggregating as the best available resources on all of the different topics that we'll cover in the course. And what we do in the course is each student is assigned to a different sector, a different business sector. And so one person might do, it's up to the students to pick, but one student might be the aviation sector, one student might be the electricity sector or the maritime sector, whatever. And they come at the assignments from the standpoint of these different sectors. And the climate web lays out all this information also from a sectoral standpoint. And the idea behind that is to give all the different students a sense of, how are different business sectors thinking about these issues that we cover in the course, because you might find that they're thinking about them in very different ways. There is no one size fits all when it comes to business climate risk perceptions and business climate risk responses. And so this knowledge management aspect of the course that I teach is a unique piece of the certificate program, but one that I hope, because you can actually download the underlying software for free, might actually encourage students to think about how knowledge management can be useful to them or to you in your everyday and your professional lives. And it's a critical thing that I wish more people were doing. Next slide. So, in the course we go through and there's a lot of information summarized in the videos. And so in my case, we'll tend to have 2 or 3 or 4 short videos every week to watch to cover specific learning objectives within the course for that week. And then you'll get into required readings, and then you'll get into the assignment for that week. And the videos cover quite a bit, but then there's also the online discussion every week which is, in my case at least, that is your time. It's the student's time. So if you come to the online discussion expecting me to talk for an hour, it's going to be a very short online discussion. It's more like office hours in the sense of, you've got the videos, you've got the readings, you've got the climate web so that you can explore anything you want. And you have the opportunity to come to the online discussion to really talk about some of those issues or to get some clarification on the assignments. And so it can be a very productive way for you to dig into the topics. Next slide. I mentioned we get into carbon offsets. There are actually a couple of different sessions during the course. As I mentioned originally, I got into this whole field through the topic of working on the first carbon offset project and doing the first carbon offset methodology. This was a project in Guatemala, organized an agroforestry project done by the relief organization CARE, and totally first impression, but I've stayed active in carbon markets and carbon offsets since then, for better or for worse, frankly. And one of the things that we cover in the course is a pretty in-depth look at carbon markets, the role of project-based mitigation as in carbon offsets, and then really understanding what the issues are. So if you get involved in carbon offsets and get involved in purchasing offsets or whatever, you understand what the real issues are, as opposed to the mass of misinformation that that is out there in terms of everyone who's trying to sell you a carbon offset. Next slide. So and this is the last slide for my session. What we try to end up with in the course is a good body of knowledge. You can always come back to the Climate Web to refresh your knowledge on any given topic, even after the course is over. And what I show you in this slide is an idea that we have where at the very end we say, okay, if you are going into a company for the first time, what are the 30 or 40 questions that you might want to ask yourself to dig into to understand where that company is coming from on climate change. With a lot of companies, you can't just go to their website and go to their web page having to do with climate change and expect to come away from that with a good understanding of where the company is on climate change. There are a lot of subsidiary questions, and some of which you can see in that one slide on your screen. So the goal of the course is really to give you the tools that you need to be in a company working on climate change, or if you're not in a company, to understand how a company is thinking about or might be thinking about the climate change issue. And these checklists at the end that you hopefully can take with you. And when you do go into a company, the 30 or 40 questions that if you can sort of ferret out the answers to those questions for the company that you're working in, you will be in a much better position to do your job and to provide good advice to decision makers in that company and to influence decision makers in that company. Because at the end of the day, that's what I see as the key role here is the information for companies to do good work in the climate change arena exists. We have almost infinite information on climate change today. The problem is that most senior decision makers never see that information. And so we have a lot of very bad decision making taking place for companies having to do with climate change. And one of the real opportunities that I see for people going into this field and hopefully coming through this course and this certificate program is to be able to go into those companies and hit the ground running in helping those companies actually get access to the best available information to result in the best possible decision making. I'm not talking about proselytizing here in terms of going in as some sort of undercover environmental activist, not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about being able to marshal the risk arguments, the business arguments, the opportunity arguments, the scenario arguments that lead to better corporate decision making. And that's something that I think students in this program will have the ability to do after going through the certificate program. So let me end it there, turn it back over, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you so much, Mark, Tom, and Rachel. This has been a really terrific overview of the program, and I wanted to leave time now for the most important thing, some of your attendee questions. So we have had a couple questions come in throughout the session, and to get us started, I'll ask a question from that we got in here. So is there, and I'm not sure, we'll see which presenter wants to take this one on. Is there a certification required to be an official GHG assessor? Is there an additional GHGI exam? Is this the only course that would enable someone to become an assessor? And if not, then how does this compare to other courses? So a bunch of questions in there, but kind of all around the same concept of, is there a certification required? And then what other options are folks aware of?
Tom, that sounds like a good one for you.
Sure, happy to respond to it. Well, the term assessor can mean different things under different jurisdictions, but I think in almost all cases, if the GHG or carbon management professional is going to provide services within a jurisdiction or under a specific program, the program generally has the authority to recognize who are qualified or accredited assessors. There are some programs such as under ISO where they have an international federation that is composed of national accreditation bodies and national standards bodies that recognize each other's accreditations of assessors. And so particularly in the case of greenhouse gas verifiers, that's relatively well established. But in terms of quantification and reporting of emissions, and I emphasize emissions, that is less extensively developed. And certainly emissions are just one component of the much more significant scope of services that Mark was describing in his presentation. So hopefully that answers the question, but if there's any remaining question, I'm happy to try to respond or open it up to any of the other presenters who'd like to add.
Thanks, Tom. I think that really summarizes the current status of the issues now and where we are, the good and bad with that. And we can expect more of that development in future, certainly as markets get more tightly developed and prices go up.
Okay, great. So here's a question about the program itself. Can you start with any course, or do courses need to be taken sequentially?
Great question. We have, as you saw, 4 courses in the program, and the courses can be taken in any sequence that you would wish. If in an ideal world, you might take them in a numerical sequence that they're stated in terms of the numbering of the courses within the catalog. But the reality is that you can take them in any sequence and they'll reinforce one another as you go along. So I wouldn't be too concerned about exactly which one you begin with. I think it's good actually sometimes to select one that is of the first interest to you, so that you get a chance to explore that and know better if that's the field you really want to develop the full expertise in.
Rachel, let me just add, this is Mark, let me just add quickly to that. When we originally designed this course, I was assuming, for example, that people would have taken the earlier cases. And so, for example, we start talking about scope 1, 2, 3 emissions in the context of carbon offsets and emissions reductions. And in some cases, people were saying, what are scopes 1, 2, 3? Because they hadn't actually taken the other courses. And that's fine. So now we've simply adapted it, and we don't go anywhere into the depth that you would go into in the prior course, or if you take it later, the later course. But it's not at all difficult to make sure that we cover the necessary topics, no matter what the order is that you're taking the courses in. And in some sense, you could argue that taking one of the more general, not general courses, but one of the slightly larger scope courses, like Rachel's course, like my course, might make sense for a lot of people before you dig into some of the more in-depth methodological courses, which right now are courses 2 and 4 in the list.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's a good addition to my answer. And I'll just add that for any of these courses, it's always good to talk directly with the professor who's involved in teaching it that semester, so that you can get a sense of what the expectations are, what you need to really succeed well in a course, and the professor can get a better sense of what expertise you're bringing into the course as you begin it.
Wonderful, thank you. And so we have another question in about the program. So about the fee specifically, the $995 per credit, how many credits are each course, and maybe you can also add into that what sort of financial or scholarship opportunities, financial aid or scholarship opportunities might exist.
Sure. Each of these is a regular graduate level course. Again, fully accepted by the university and regular part of the catalog. And so it's a 3 credit hour course, each one of them. And so you multiply the $9.95 by 3 to get the cost of each course. These courses, courtesy of the Environmental and Energy Management Institute, where the program is housed, is actually reduced 50% from the normal cost of courses at George Washington University. So we've subsidized this very substantially to make it affordable for you to get into the program. In terms of any further support that might be available, the policy of the university is that you can discuss that with the financial aid office once you are admitted into a program at the university. So that would be the sequence of steps that would be applied to the program, get accepted to the program, discuss your program intentions, and make selections as to your courses. At the same time as that, then you can be discussing potential for any additional aid that might be available if you have the need and can demonstrate that need, and if the university may be able to come up with that. But all of those things are not in my hands to make the decision. So you'd be speaking with the financial aid office then with regard to any additional funding that might be available. I will say that a lot of the people taking these courses end up, maybe working for a corporation, and the corporation is happy to see them taking these courses and will actually fund or reimburse the courses then, and that works out pretty well. And we can usually work out the payment timing so that you're not out from your own budget, and your reimbursement maybe from your company can arrive with you at the same time you're making the payment for the courses.
Great, and I think that's actually a good transition to the next question that I think I'm going to try and combine with another one that came in as well. So the question is, what is the profile of companies and institutions, but no NGOs, where a GHG professional can work? And I think more broadly speaking, what would a career in this field look like? So maybe in your answers, you can try to answer that specific question about companies and institutions, and then more broadly speaking, what a career might look like.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll mention something about some of the students who have taken this program, and then others can jump in and give their considered opinions and experience and expertise on this. Surprisingly, a great deal of interest is shown in this program by the fossil fuel industry. So quite a few, especially from the petroleum industry, have expressed great interest in this. So whether it's majors or independent, or service companies associated with that, like drilling companies and so on. So that's a major line of interest in the program. Another one are the utilities. And again, this is another example. Both of these are examples of where the corporations themselves are really quite happy to pay for the tuition of the students taking these courses, because they're going to need that information internally for their operations. And of course, utilities, many being regulated and many being under a great deal of pressure to reduce their emissions, really rely on this kind of information in order to move their business models forward. And then I'll open it up to Tom or Mark that might want to add something to that.
Sure, thanks, Rachel. I would fully agree with what you're saying, and then also add that many of the large services companies, and small too, hire these experts with this type of capability, whether it's on the sort of consulting and accounting side or on the audit side. Myself, before co-founding GHGMI, worked, well, same with Mark, we both worked in a large global certification organization that would almost entirely focus our time in working with the big corporates or with, say, clean technology companies that are engaging funders, whether those are private finance or public finance, and need to have the all of the metrics and systems that would substantiate their carbon benefits vis-a-vis whatever their competitor reference cases are. And I could go on and on about the different corporations, large and small, that are hiring. And just recently, there's been a real hot market for acquisitions of entire companies that's exclusively focusing on delivering carbon management and related resilience, climate resilience services by some of the biggest financial service firms and financial institutions in the world. So it just underscores the demand and the shortage for people in the space across the different types of organizations. Mark, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, let me just add quickly to that, Tom, and have a very short story. The electric utilities, the oil sector, they actually started looking at this issue 25 plus years ago because they knew this issue would either hit them over the head quickly or get around to them eventually. It's been a much slower slog, so to speak, to get everyone else talking about the issue. Not so much that those sectors acted on this issue in a huge way, but they've certainly been involved in tracking and in some ways undermining the issue over those years. It was only in 2011 that a big report, a big consulting report, Mercer Consulting with other players, came out and said, you know, climate change now needs to be thought of as a material business variable. And that was a huge shift in this conversation. But even then, the report said, and that's because of potential policy. They said, look, climate change itself is still decades away. So the impacts of climate change aren't the impacts that we need to be looking at. It's the potential policy responses to climate change that create the potential business materiality. So that was in 2011. In 2015, exactly the same players came out and said, oops, we were a little bit off. It's not decades and decades into the future, it's already here. And so the impacts of climate change have arrived, and they also need to be thought of as a potentially material business variable. That was in 2015. And so from then, we've gone in some sense from 0 to 1,000 in terms of every bank, every major investment company, every major company has to be saying something about this, has to have some kind of a position, has to be able to say that they are adapting, that they are responding, that they are thinking about. They simply can't be silent anymore on the issue. And so what that implies is that there are going to be a lot more people with the title of climate change specialist or climate change officer or whatever in a lot of companies. And that's a very recent trend. And my sense is that we want this issue to become a strategic issue within companies, not just a quantification, footprint quantification question. And that's why my particular course is oriented the way it is, to help make sure this issue becomes a strategic decision-making issue for companies.
Excellent, thank you for those answers. So we have a couple questions here, and I think we'll just do 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll you can direct the rest of your questions to Rachel, and her email is provided on the slide there. But we did get a couple questions from around whether there are additional fees or additional considerations for potential international students who might be interested in this program. One student from Nigeria and one student from Canada are asking, or potential prospective students are asking.
Okay, thanks, Tony, for that, and for your questions, whoever asked those. There are no international student fees added to this, so there's no requirement to do that as long as you're just taking the online courses in this program, since you will be taking them from your home country, presumably, and not having to come to the United States. And so GW has international student fees, but they do not apply in this particular situation, so you're safe there. There are the usual application fees and student fees and things like that. Those are quite small compared to the tuition that you have to deal with, and hopefully your company will help you with. And again, we're giving you a 50% discount on this one, so that helps a great deal. So and those other fees are something, you know, we can talk about in some circumstances. Even some of those can be waived. So depending on individual needs and all, you can be in touch with me individually about those other fees. They're all outlined on the program website. If you go to the Apply tab, you'll see a step-by-step guide on how to go through that, and I'll be available also to help you get through that process. As usual in a university, there's an amazing amount of administrative things that we have to go through. So it is a process for the application, and just to remind you, GW is a very competitive school for admission. So I strongly encourage you, if you're interested in the program, to begin your application process very soon, so that we're sure you'll be through that and accepted into the program before the semester begins in mid-January then.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. So I think we'll just do one more question, and then please send any remaining questions to Rachel in the email provided on the screen there. So to finish it up, what recent developments will affect the demand for carbon management professionals? And I know that we've talked about this in regards to potential careers and job opportunities, but what that's on the horizon or in the works currently around the TCFD recommendations, the climate finance frameworks driving change among stakeholders in the financial sector, and also touching on the carbon offset markets and ICAO specifically. So I think the answers will probably bounce around a little bit, but Tom, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I can start us off, and then I'm sure Mark can add a lot more color. The Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or TCFD, that provided recommendations to financial authorities, central banks, and to other authorities over the financial sector, came out a couple of years ago, or at least the first draft, and that has rapidly been adopted within, I would say, compared to, say, political negotiations within the financial sector. And we're starting to see more and more financial institutions onboarding the frameworks or systems, tools, the experts, of course. And even today, I just noticed an announcement by the Royal Bank of Canada, Canada's largest bank, that they are launching a new program related to climate. And there's many others. So just that one caught my eye this morning here, Eastern time. And the organizations are going the extra distance to really get into the details on the quantification of emissions and all the basics that relate to the carbon metrics, to better understand the pros and cons or risks and opportunities for their investments and themselves. And that, of course, influences where capital is going to go. Again, today I just saw, and I know we're in the season of COP, and so we see a particularly high flow of information, but one around finance that approximately 4.5 trillion annually towards a variety of climate finance investments, both mitigation and on the adaptation side as well. And so it's a huge amount of funding that needs to be well placed, sound decisions, and underneath that is all of the capabilities that the certificate program helps to support. And I would just add one other point to that is I earlier mentioned the several recent acquisitions by groups like S&P Global and Moody's and MSCI and Wells Fargo and on of organizations that are integrating with their competency digital tools. The Climate Web's an excellent example as well, that are absolutely essential given the extensive nature of climate change and how to best tackle it. So I would say that those drivers of the financial sector and sort of the mega trend of digitization across all sectors, including sustainability and climate, is what's driving the demand. And I'll leave it at that. Hand it over to Mark.
And let me come at the question from just a slightly different perspective to supplement what Tom's been saying. Yes, there's a huge amount going on. I did a lot of the first carbon footprints for companies literally 30 years ago, and sometimes I wonder, oh my God, what did we do? What did we start? Because now there is so much data, so much focus on carbon footprinting and on getting exact numbers, et cetera, that in many cases we've entirely lost the perspective on what is it we were originally trying to do, which is climate change mitigation. And a lot of times it's easy for these numbers and for some of these methodological processes to get in the way or to become goals in and of themselves. So we have that slide showing how carbon pricing is spreading around the world, but we don't ask the question, well, is carbon pricing making any difference to decision making? And if the answer is no, then what exactly was the purpose of the carbon pricing? And there is a very real risk in some of the things that we're talking about here in terms of the TCFD process and scenario planning and some of these things. I mean, CEOs could simply assign, some new employee. So there's an opportunity for new hires, yes, could simply assign some new employee to go take care of this for me, so I don't have to worry about it. And that, that creates a lot of new jobs for people in this space, but it's also critical for those people to have a strategic perspective on, don't just let this be sidelined into my cubbyhole, and I'll produce a report that sits on a shelf somewhere, but it doesn't actually make any difference to the company's decision making. How do you actually influence company decision making using these new ways in? And that's really what Tom's talking about, is we now have a lot more ways into company decision makers, and but you've got to have a good strategic sense of how to make use of those ways. And that's one of the things that I think you can get through the certificate program. And yes, there are going to be a lot more certificates, I suspect, popping up. I know of various NGOs that are starting to come up with their own sort of certificate programs. So again, something that's officially affiliated with a university like George Washington may end up looking a lot better on a CV than some of the other certificate programs that are likely to be popping up. And let me just close by also saying that if you do have any specific questions relating to my course, which is the course being taught this coming semester, don't hesitate to add me onto your email with Rachel, and I'm available at mtrexler, MTREXLER @GWU.edu. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you for those answers. And we will be following up with an email that includes a link to the recording of this session and also provides some of those email contacts. There will be a survey following the webinar as well, just asking a couple questions for your feedback if you've got a couple seconds to help us out with that. And yeah, please do not hesitate to email Rachel. I know she'd be more than happy to answer all of your inquiries. So thank you all so much for taking the time today to join us for this webinar, and we'll hope to be in touch soon. Take care.
Thank you, Tani. Nicely done. Really appreciate your management of that.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.